So are you familiar with KickTrack?
I have no idea what it is.
Okay, so here is KickTrack. This is how we can kind of X-ray the Star Trek Continues project. So KickTrack is a third-party website that downloads a bunch of data from Kickstarter and then gives you the data from what actually happened on that campaign.
Cool.
So this is a really interesting tool for anybody who is trying to run Kickstarter campaigns. It doesn't work for other crowdfunding sites because it's hooked into the Kickstarter API. There's clearly a lot of data there anyway for Kickstarter, and to see how these things work. So, for instance, I was looking at the KickTrack for, this is their first Star Trek Continues web series. And so you can see here, they are showing the way, like this is the total amount of money that was raised per day,
Right.
all the way across the campaign. So they were trying to raise $100,000.
Gotcha.
But it took them a long time. They started very slow, right? And they started to build, and they finally crossed it, and then they were slow, and everybody gets this uptick here at the end because things are ending. If we go over here to the daily data, we can actually break down and see how much money they made per day. So here's like on the first day, they only brought in $1,434. Then they brought in $4,698, and then they had a relatively large third day. And then they're bouncing around. And then it's not until like 2/3 of the way through the campaign that they actually start getting some donations, that are actually driving them forward here. And also you can see that this is the number of backers that are coming in. So, the number of backers are with
matches up.
Yeah, it's not that they had one person come in and give them $25,000.
Right.
They did bring in more. And then the number of comments that are also on their channel. So, I interviewed Jamie Stegmaier on the channel, who is in the tabletop gaming space, and he's one of the extreme success stories of crowdfunding. He's now running a $25 million a year tabletop gaming company based on, and he hasn't crowdfunded in years. He launched the company through crowdfunding, but then moved on to more traditional ways. And, this to me, I'll tell you how it's connected in a second, but this to me looks like a very kind of ad hoc spread for the way that they brought in the money for this. If we go over to their next campaign, so this is the 2015 Kickstarter 2.0, and we take a look at the Kickstarter data here. This is our pledges per day, and it looks like we have a much more traditional kind of Kickstarter curve here, because like on their second one, they brought in $38,000, almost $39,000 on the first day. So all of their people were prepped. They had their people prepped for their second campaign. They didn't have anybody prepped for their first campaign. If I go over to, and Jamie had told me on his that, I asked him, could he do it again? Could he do what he had done again? And he said no, which is both discouraging from a creator's perspective, that, he's created this extremely successful company, but he's like saying that the state of crowdfunding today and things like that would not allow him to do it again. If you look at his final Kickstarter campaign, which was Scythe right here. Now he's moved on to other more traditional means of publishing now. But if you take a look at his daily data, okay, here's the data. Okay, now see here, we've got this U shape, which is much more like what their second Kickstarter had. He brought in $579,000 on the very first day. His people were ready. And then there's a drop off on the second day, and then the third day. And then in the middle of the campaign, you're just plugging along until you get to the end of the campaign, when you've got everybody who is, waiting at the last minute. Oh, I got to get in. So this U shape is indicative of kind of a mature crowdfunding campaign. So that kind of tells me that when he ran the first one, I mean, this was a long time ago too. And it was in the wild west of crowdfunding. And, you might be able to start a campaign basically with no one. I mean, he did basically start it with no one. Only 47 people showed up on his first day. But then he's like, but then people must have, oh, it's Star Trek, something. And, back then crowdfunding was new, and, people started coming in. And so we've got this weird shape this very ad hoc shape on our first Kickstarter campaign. And so that is also the kind of thing that makes me skeptical that, well, can you do it again? Now, he might be able to because he has the name recognition. If you're gonna do this with Star Wars, you're gonna do it with Vic, you're gonna do it with Star Trek, and you're gonna do it with Vic, then I bet you can get people to show up. But on the other hand, if I'm talking to other people who are not doing something with Star Trek and are not Vic Mignogna, then I'd say, okay, even he had this very uneven. I mean, anything could have happened on this first Kickstarter. It seems like there's no guarantee. It seems like they have not exactly a perfect U shape, but a much more, a much closer to U shape on the second Kickstarter. So, I mean, I don't know what that tells me is that this was the Wild West when they came out, and it did work for them. But they've got a lot of things working with his name recognition, and they've got a whole lot working with them with Star Trek, and they had a lot working with them saying that this was a new kind of thing. Hey, Kickstarter.
Well, the first series was self-financed. This was the second one. So he had something to show people. That blip.
But didn't he just have the first episode or something like that, or 2 episodes? I don't think he had the Well, he did have something out there. Yes, he did. He had something out there. Yes,
he had something out there, and that blip could be a fan fest or something. Something that allowed him to market it directly to a larger group of people. That almost looks like a trade show blip.
Exactly. What I would do if I were going into this in more detail, not on this stream, but I would start to look at all the comments on those days and also his updates. And so if he says something like, hey, we were just covered by X, Y, and Z. And then people in the comments are saying, hey, I just saw you on whatever trade show and I'm here.
Right.
So
then you would know.
Right. But if that hadn't happened, this Kickstarter would have been a very different story. Because whatever happened, it really drove this Kickstarter right in here. And that's what made it.
And not everybody has a property like Star Trek, as you said, to piggyback on.
Right. Yeah. And I know you guys talked about that on the show, and you're like, what, do you recommend starting with something like Star Trek and doing a fan film in order to build a fan base? It's a potential strategy, but it's also not necessarily a given one, because you can definitely bring out all the Star Trek people. But then if you say, hey, I got this Western next, there's no guarantee they're going to follow you for the next thing.
Well, the problem is that most people don't understand that it's not about asking people to support you. It's to put enough pieces together to challenge people to turn you down. So the kinds of things when you're in Hollywood, the biggest mistake this is why the big agencies package things. So you go in as a struggling scriptwriter and you're like shaking and you're going, hey, here's my idea. Whereas a production company goes in, I've got De Niro as the lead actor. I've got Tom Hanks as his partner. This script was written by Joe Esterhazy. I have Sigourney Weaver as the actress. It's being directed by John Verhoeven. Okay, turn me down, fucker.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like that. I like that philosophy.
So that's the philosophy you have to have with everything that you're doing. You don't go into Kickstarter or anything like that hoping for success. It's the absolute, so what you're doing is correct in the sense that, okay, I got Kickstarter. Who else can I get on board to pitch it for me? What's, the best person? What other, how am I going to drive people to Kickstarter? And so you are front loading it, as you called it, to the best of your ability. If you hope to convince people by the mid cycle of Kickstarter to, get people to come on board, you're lost.
You absolutely are.
Terrible strategy.
That's why I tell people, hope marketing. If you're hope marketing does not work.
No.
You cannot build your company around hope marketing. That's not something that happens.
Yeah. So not only do you need all the assets and things like that to begin with. So yeah, you have to develop the attitude of not begging for success, but challenging people to turn you down.
Yeah. But my point was, if I were looking at that, I would say that that was a different time. Like when he
Yeah.
was running his
I
first
don't know what it's
Kickstarter, it was
like
a different
now.
time. I wouldn't try. I wouldn't count on saying I can replicate that again, even if I were him. Now he has tremendous advantages, like I said, with his name recognition and stuff like that. But there's still things I would talk about. But if you're not him, because I'll put it another way. One of the things I've been doing is documenting all of the things that I have done through the Business for Creatives channel, because I want people to be able to not reinvent the wheel. If I go through this, people can follow me, they can see what I'm doing and stuff like that. And I think that's very important. But the flip side of that is, if you go back to my first Kickstarter campaign, that was back in the wild, wild west. And so if you went, don't look at where I am now. Not that I'm anywhere big. But if somebody's looking at where I am now and the kinds of things that I have done, don't look at that. Go and look at the original Kickstarter campaign I did. I mean, that was my brother and I hacking it together in his kitchen. We were, but on the other hand, if you did that again today, it would not work.
No.
So that's a double-edged sword. Here's the path that I took. But on the other hand, if you do exactly what I did, it's also not going to